Kia ora, everybody. Today, we're tackling one of the most common questions employers may ask when supporting their migrant workers through the SMC or the skilled migrant category. And that is, which wage threshold does my worker actually need to meet?
Well, that's a great question, Lauren, because from the 24th of August 2026, the way SMC wage thresholds are applied will change.
So let's start with the basics, Brendan. What exactly is the SMC wage threshold?
So, the SMC wage threshold is the minimum pay rate used to assess whether your worker's skilled employment or skilled work experience meets residence requirements. Previously, employers and workers often had to keep track of changing wage thresholds over time, and in some cases, a worker needed to meet a higher threshold when applying for residence than they did when they first started working.
Great. So, can you run us through what's actually changing from the 24th of August 2026?
So the key change, Lauren, is that most applicants will use the SMC wage threshold that applied when they started gaining their skilled work experience in New Zealand. That means that if threshold increases later, you won't usually need to increase their pay to the new higher threshold just because time has passed, as long as they continue to meet the relevant threshold and other pathway requirements.
Well, that sounds like a real positive, Brendan, but could you give us an example?
Sure, so as one example, let's say someone applies through the skilled work experience pathway. They started gaining their skilled work experience on the 10th of August 2023 and they were earning $33 an hour. Now, at that time, the SMC wage threshold for the skilled work experience pathway was $32.62 per hour, which was 1.1 times SMC wage threshold. Now, because they started above the threshold, they can continue using that wage threshold as long as they maintain pay above $32.62 per hour and they are invited to apply before the 10th of August 2027. Now, even if the threshold increases later, you do not need to move them up to the newer rate for that work experience to keep counting.
Thanks, Brendan. So, for employers, it's really about understanding which wage threshold was in place when the worker's work experience began.
Yep, that threshold is really important. And another one to talk about is the grace period too. So there is a grace period that applies when someone starts their skilled work experience within 5 months of their work visa being granted. In that situation, they may be able to use the wage threshold that was in effect on the date the visa was granted, even if the threshold increased before they started work with you.
Could you sort of walk us through a real example there, Brendan?
Yep. So let's say an example of imagine a person had their work visa approved on the 14th of January 2023, when the SMC wage threshold was $27.76 per hour. They then started skilled employment with you on the 13th of June 2023, earning $28 per hour. Now, by then, the threshold had increased to $29.66 per hour. But because less than 5 months passed between the visa approval and the start of employment, they can still use the earlier threshold of $27.76 per hour rather than the higher $29.66 threshold.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, that's a really, really great example of how the grace period can help employers understand whether a worker's employment may count towards residence.
Absolutely. And in summary, that the key message for employers is that your workers' wage threshold is linked to when they started gaining skilled work experience, or in some cases, the date their work visa was granted under the grace period rules.
So, thank you so much for joining us today. If you're supporting a worker towards residence, please check the latest eligibility requirements and guidance on our website before making any really important employment or pay decisions.
Thanks for listening, and Matua. We'll see you next time.
Ka pai.